And here we have our completed zipper placket. And what we're going to do now is just separate these zippers because we will be using them at different times now. And I'm going to fold the placket in half so that I can clip along the basted edge just to show my center. So now I have a snip, a little notch cut in my center, and we're going to do that to both plackets. And you're also going to want to do the same thing with the upper contrast piece, which is what we're going to be working with now. Fold this in half and find the center of the long edge, and also find the center of the top edge, which is actually going to be inside this dip right here. So you're going to have a notch cut out in the center of this dip and a notch cut out right here. And do that to both of your upper contrast pieces. Set one of your upper contrasts aside and pick up one of your zipper plackets. Now we're going to want to make sure that the right side of the placket, the right side of the zipper, is against the right side of your upper contrast piece. Line up the center notches that you just cut along the bottom straight edge of your upper contrast piece, and then clip this in place. We're going to do the same thing on the other side, making sure that the right side of your zipper is facing the right side of your upper contrast piece, which in turn makes the end of your zipper and the beginning of your zipper are going to be pointing in opposite directions. And we're going to baste that in place along the straight edge. Our zipper plackets are now basted to our upper contrast pieces, and next we are going to attach our lower panels to our upper contrast pieces. And here's where you make a decision about which direction you're going to want your zipper to open. Personally, I like to have the slip pocket facing the back of the bag, and I like to have my zipper opening to the right. So I'm going to place these right sides together, and I'm going to match up the centers as well as the side edges and clip this in place. I'm going to do the same to the other panel, and then this should get sewn at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Both of our upper contrast pieces are now sewn to our lower panels, and what we're going to do next is top stitch these. So we're going to open up this upper contrast piece, and we are going to kind of finger press the lower panel down. So the seam allowance is pointing down towards the lower panel, and we are going to top stitch along the seam through the lower panel and through the seam allowance. All right, both of our lower panels are now top stitched underneath the zipper placket. And the next step that we're going to do now is just trim away a little bit of this seam allowance right here, right where we just top stitched. I'm going to get rid of some of that material. On both of the upper contrast and lower panels. And next we're going to put each of these panels right sides together, and I'm going to line up the center of the upper contrast first, And then next I'm going to align the seam that connects the upper contrast to the lower panel. So I'm going to line those up and clip those together. And then I'm going to clip down the edge of the lower panel. I'm going to align the center snips at the bottom edge. And then I'm going to put a clip in the zipper tails. Just kind of fold them back on themselves and clip them to the rest of the zipper to kind of keep those out of the way. And then the next thing I'm going to do is align this seam where the upper contrast meets the lower panel. And then I'm going to clip and continue to clip down the edge of the lower panel. And I'm going to put one up here as well. We're now going to sew down this side and this side. We're not going to sew across the bottom. We're not going to sew the boxed corners either. Just the two sides at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Okay, do the same to the other side. We have sewn up each edge of the liner panel, and instead of cutting these down, what we're going to do instead is open up the seam allowance, and we're going to top stitch down the seam allowance inside the bag. So I'm going to remove all the clips that were holding everything together earlier, and this is going to be the same process as our last top stitched seam of our exterior, but it's going to be much easier because this liner panel is not as structured as your exterior was. So you're just going to open up this seam all the way down. And top stitch all the way down one side of the seam. And you're going to make sure that any folds of the liner stay out of your top stitch, so you don't catch anything but this seam. Okay, I reached the bottom, so I'm pivoting. And I'm about to sew back up the other side, making sure that the seam stays open. Now we are also going to be trimming away some of the seam allowance right at the top of the bag, just like that. So your seam now looks like this, top stitched open from the outside and from the inside. And repeat that on the other side. We now have our completed liner with an open bottom, and this is going to be good for birthing your bag. It's nice and wide and open, so it shouldn't be difficult at all to birth your bag. And everything is nicely top stitched. Let's make sure that we trim the seam allowance from the second top stitch that we just did. And it is now time to slip this over the exterior and line everything up so that we can attach the liner to the exterior.